As we've mentioned, the convention starts in Charlotte tonight. There are going to be some interesting guests. The theme this week for the convention, according to the Republican National Committee, is honoring the great American story, and Chapter 1 tonight is Land of Promise. Let's talk a little bit about what we can expect to see or not see. There's an interesting story in Politico today, which is, this is the Nancy Cook story. The majority of Republican politicians and operatives will learn about the details of this week's convention in the same manner most Americans do, by watching it unfold on TV. Well, let's talk about it. Again, Bill Rosenberg with us, Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, tweeting at DRB Rosenberg. Bill, welcome back. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning.
So this is a bit of a work in progress, it sounds like, or it's a surprise, or I'm not quite sure. Give us your sense of where the Republicans are as they begin tonight after last week's 4-night Democratic convention.
Well, I think we have to recognize that the coronavirus has put had a major impact on the way the political parties are conducting their business in 2020. The Republicans had the advantage of seeing how the Democrats presented their convention to maybe pick up a little bit of tips and techniques that might be successful for them. But at the same time, we have to recognize that they're going about it in a very different way. The Democrats, prior to the convention, had a platform process where they brought together the Bernie Sanders and progressive wing with the moderates and drafted a platform, and then at the convention they actually ratified a new platform. The Republicans have decided that they're not even going to have a new platform in 2020. They're going to say, well, we'll do one in 2024. And while in some ways it makes sense that it's really hard to negotiate platforms at a distance, it also shows how the two parties are different in terms of what they consider important. I'd also suggest that we have to recognize that for people that are politically interested, like most of your listeners, most Americans don't actually see the conventions. The Democratic convention was carried by CNN, MSNBC, and NPR. It wasn't on the networks except for a portion of it each night. And this will be the same pattern that exists in the Republican convention, only there'll be the addition of the RNC. That doesn't mean that people don't hear about the convention. They certainly hear the media spin, and as a result learn what's going on and see various small portions, and will respond to what they think is good and what they think is bad. So it's a mediated version in 2020 as opposed to an actual convention where people come and rub elbows next to each other.
Did you miss the old convention style last week or not?
Well, actually, I really enjoyed the Democratic convention, not just in terms of the politics, but in terms of the presentation. I thought probably for me one of the most exciting moments was the roll call vote, where they went to all 50 states plus various territories, and each had about 30 or 45 seconds to make a brief pitch about how they are going to distribute their votes, but also something about their state as well. And, most memorably may have been the calamari from Rhode Island. All of a sudden it created a new discussion. But it really gave a sense of what America was about. The other thing I would say is that the parties are going to go about this in different ways. I think one of the issues that really came up was Biden's message about the issue of light and darkness. Biden stated that he was embracing light. He was trying to, in effect, show that he was a very human person, and he wanted to convey that to every man and every woman. Just after the convention was over, Donald Trump went to Pennsylvania, to Old Forge, Pennsylvania, and gave a speech that most probably would consider that on the side of darkness, where he said Biden's going to raise your taxes, open your borders, and let violent mobs in, and they're going to turn your family against you, and they're coming to get you, and that the American dream is basically over. So we're going to have to see whether or not Donald Trump continues with the convention and his own speeches in that manner, or whether he's going to be able to stick to teleprompters written by aides, which in the past he sometimes is able to do for at least a portion of his presentations, but hardly ever can he get it all the way through.
Dr. William Rosenberg with us, professor of political science at Drexel University, discussing the conventions. I was just reminded in 2012 of Clint Eastwood being at the Republican convention in Tampa. Those were the days. Those were very different. I wanted to get your sense of whether or not the typical conventional wisdom has been, okay, you got to have something more than just a criticism of the incumbent to be able to win. In the case of Donald Trump, there was an awful lot of that last week. Was there enough of an optimistic message also to be able to win? Or is in the case of Donald Trump, is an attack on the individual sufficient to the cause for a Democratic victory?
Well, there's actually a couple of points to be made in this. I think in our current political landscape, it's very unlikely that very many people are going to change their minds as a result of the convention or the debates, which will be coming later in the fall. Most people understand what these two candidates are about and probably have already made up their minds. Normally, we see a little bit of a bump after conventions. After the Democratic convention, the Democrat does better, and after the Republican does better. But in this year, we saw only a minor bump, 1%, in terms of the polling numbers for Joe Biden in terms of the vote issue. But in terms of favorability, he went up about 5 points. We're going to see what happens with Donald Trump, who has decided, albeit sort of a similar pattern to the Democrats, where he's going to appear every night, kind of reminiscent of how he approaches his roles as press secretary for himself as well. But we also have to recognize that Joe Biden basically appeared every night, sometimes doing a mini focus group with 5 people or at a small gathering or making a short speech. So we're really facing a situation where there's game changers. The way in which we're being presented to the candidates is very much in a different light. I would also say that the conventions are giving the opportunity for us to see what the parties are about. And as I mentioned earlier, the Democrats redid their platform. The Republicans are not going to have one. And I think what we have to recognize is that the candidate, Trump, in his opportunity this week, will have to sort of probably temper down a little bit of his rhetoric. Otherwise, he may actually scare away some voters, some independents and some Republicans or Republican voters from 2016 that may not want to stay on the bandwagon.
Last point is the convention coverage. You mentioned in the beginning about the networks and what they're going to do, et cetera. It seems to me that one of the big parts of this, aside from the fact that this is coronavirus time where a lot more people have been doing virtual things, but there's an awful lot of viewing evidently online, and that is different from years past, I think.
Right. I think, everyone carries their own receiver. And when I say receiver, I'm essentially talking about your cell phone, where you can go on to whatever site you want and either watch live coverage or watch coverage of the coverage. And I think that gives people an opportunity. But again, I think that's for those that are more politically oriented. I think a lot of people will simply say, I'm not necessarily going to be so engaged with this. I know who these people are. And finally, there was a last point I just want to get in before the end of our segment. I still reminisce about 2016 when at one of the debates, Hillary Clinton had been asked and Donald Trump also had been asked to say one positive area in which they kind of respected the other, and there was a kind of a little bit of a pregnant pause. But ultimately, Hillary Clinton came back and made a comment that she respected the way Donald Trump raised his children, saying that he was a successful parent, and it reflects well on him. I think as we go into the 2020 convention, if Hillary Clinton was asked that same question, I doubt she would answer it in the same way now. We're going to see Donald Trump's children at the convention, and probably one of his most strong advocates and is Donald Trump Jr., and he is often very, very negative in terms of his portrayal of Democrats and progressives in the country. So this further pushes along this narrative of polarization that's going to probably come out in even greater detail in 2020.
We will watch. And Dr. William Rosenberg, thanks for being with us on POTUS today for a little preview. Thanks for being here, Bill.
All right. Have a great day. Enjoy your watching.
Too. Thank you. Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, joining us for a look at the RNC and, of course, what happened last week with the DNC conventions. He is tweeting at DRB Rosenberg, Rosenberg.